It's not every day that you come home to find your driveway blocked off by 4 orange construction cones, a hand-scrawled "private property," no trespassing sign wedged between them, and your neighbor Karen standing sentry like a mall cop on a power trip. The first clue that something in my universe had snapped wasn't even the cones, or the sign, or the way Karen was standing with her arms crossed, glaring at my front bumper like it was plotting to overthrow her regime. It was the fact that I'd left for work just 12 hours earlier and everything was perfectly normal. I parked in the same spot I'd parked in every day for the past 3 years, exchanged my usual nod with Karen, who was already out pruning her rose bushes at 7 a.m., and didn't give a second thought to whether my driveway was, in fact, mine. But now Karen was there, practically vibrating with indignation, blocking me from entering my own property. She didn't wait for me to get out of my car before she started waving at me, like I was an Uber driver she'd ordered by mistake. I rolled down my window, and before I could say a word, she unleashed a barrage. "Excuse me, you can't park here anymore. This driveway is actually part of my property line. I checked with the HOA and city records." She said it with the authority of someone who had just read the phrase, "property line," on a next-door post and decided she was now a certified expert. The cones, apparently, were her badge. I played dumb, which is easy when you're being ambushed by neighborhood drama before you've even finished digesting your lunch. "Karen, what are you talking about? My house is right there. This is literally my driveway. My address is painted on the curb." Her response was classic Karen, arms folded tighter, voice rising for the benefit of any neighbor within a 3-house radius. "The property lines are confusing. The HOA confirmed it's technically part of my lot. You'll have to park elsewhere until it's sorted out." I noticed she'd angled the cones so nobody could miss the sign, as if she were expecting a parade of traffic to violate her sovereignty. I would have laughed if she didn't look so utterly convinced of her imaginary jurisdiction. I decided to test her resolve, slowly pulling my car up until the nose was practically kissing one of her cones. That's when she lunged forward, arms waving frantically. "Don't you dare move those cones. I'm warning you." The show had officially begun. I could see Mrs. Patel across the street, pretending to water her geraniums but definitely eavesdropping, and the Wilson twins riding their bikes in slow loops, no doubt texting play-by-play updates to their friends. I weighed my options. On one hand, I could escalate right then and there, but I knew Karen was the kind who thrived on confrontation. She'd probably been rehearsing this speech in the mirror for days. On the other, I could be patient. After all, I had a secret weapon. The plat map in my office drawer, signed and sealed, which clearly showed the driveway was mine and always had been. So I smiled, put the car in reverse, and parked on the street right behind the cones. "All right, Karen. If the HOA says so, I'll wait for the paperwork." Her face twisted, like she'd been expecting an explosion, not compliance. But that's the thing with people like her. They only know how to play offense, never defense. I could already see her mentally scrambling, wondering what I was plotting. She retreated to her porch but kept peeking through her window, probably expecting me to launch a midnight cone heist. That night, I called the HOA office, which is to say, I left a voicemail that would languish in a sea of bureaucratic purgatory until Karen herself had moved on to a new vendetta. I also emailed the city planning office, attaching a scan of my plat map and asking, in the most measured tone possible, if there'd been any recent changes to property boundaries on my street. I didn't expect a quick reply, but I needed a paper trail, always important when the games escalate from orange cones to actual lawyers. The next morning, the cones were still up, but Karen was nowhere to be seen. I took the opportunity to snap a few photos for my records. Evidence is everything when dealing with people whose hobbies include inventing new property rights. I went back to my regular routine, parking on the street, nodding to neighbors, pretending the whole situation was nothing more than a passing storm cloud. But I noticed the way people looked at the cones, at me, at Karen's window. Drama spreads fast in our neighborhood, and everyone loves to watch. 3 days later, the first official shot was fired. I came home to find a yellow flyer stuck to my door, bearing the all-too-familiar insignia of our HOA. Notice of violation, it read, in all caps, because nothing says authority like shouting in Times New Roman. According to the notice, I was in violation for parking in a restricted area. No further details, just a threat of escalating fines and a number to call, 4 questions. I didn't need to guess who filed the complaint. That night, after making sure my security camera had a clear view of my driveway, I printed out a copy of my plat map and tacked it to my kitchen corkboard. I was ready. Karen might think she had the upper hand, but I've lived through enough HOA drama to know the secret weapon is always patience and paperwork. By the end of the week, Karen upped her game. She started leaving passive-aggressive notes on my windshield. Please respect my property. Parking here is trespassing. She even went as far as having a landscaping company spray a faint line of orange paint across my driveway, trying to physically manifest her imaginary border. I caught her in the act once, holding a can of spray paint and looking like a child busted with a jar of cookies. Just marking the boundary, she chirped. HOA says it's necessary for everyone's safety. I made a mental note to add vandalism to the growing list of grievances. Things reached a fever pitch the following Saturday morning, when I woke to the sound of shouting outside. Karen was standing on the sidewalk, phone in hand, gesturing wildly at my parked car and yelling for everyone to hear. I've already called the police. This man refuses to stop trespassing on my property. By the time the squad car pulled up, half the block had gathered on their porches. I watched from my window, equal parts annoyed and amused, as the officer listened to Karen's story with the barely concealed weariness of someone who'd already had 2 cups of coffee ruined by suburban drama. When it was finally my turn to speak, I handed over my paperwork, pointing to the official city seals, the survey lines, the records that proved Karen was living in a fantasy. The officer took one look at the evidence, looked back at Karen, and sighed. Ma'am, property disputes are civil matters. There's nothing criminal here. Maybe talk to your neighbor instead. Karen's face contorted, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But as the police left, she shot me a look that made one thing crystal clear. She was just getting started. And so was I. If there's one thing you learn from living next to a Karen, it's that she doesn't retreat, she reloads. The cop visit didn't deflate her. If anything, it energized her, like she'd just completed level 1 of a boss fight and unlocked a new set of petty powers. The cones came back with reinforcements. She duct-taped laminated NO parking, private property signs to every tree, mailbox, and lamppost along my property line. My front yard started to look like the world's least popular used car lot, festooned with rules nobody but Karen cared about. I even found a little sign zip-tied to the chain-link fence around my trash bins, as if my garbage was in on the conspiracy. My driveway, my actual, legally documented driveway, had officially been annexed by the Republic of Karen. She became bolder. Instead of waiting for me to come home, she'd stand on the porch with her phone, recording me every time I parked on the street or stepped out of my house. At first, I ignored her, but after the 3rd day of feeling like I lived in a low-budget reality show, I started to play along. I gave her a little wave, flashed my best Neighbor of the Month smile, and even started narrating my actions out loud for her camera. Day 3, still parking legally. Stay tuned for more pointless drama. She didn't laugh, of course, but her scowl deepened to new levels of artistry. I swear she must have a gallery wall inside her house dedicated to the many shades of her indignation. But beneath my sarcasm, I felt the tension mounting. The HOA wasn't responding to my emails, the city had sent a generic reply promising to look into it, and Karen's campaign was clearly having an effect on the neighborhood. The kids who used to cut through my driveway to get to the park now swerved onto the street, and old Mrs. Patel had started asking subtle, loaded questions about property boundaries and proper neighborly conduct. It's amazing how quickly a well-placed rumor can erode 3 years of normalcy. I had a plan, though. I dug up every document I could find: deed, plat map, property tax statements, even the original survey done when the house was built. I organized everything into a neat binder, color-coded and tabbed. If Karen wanted a war of paperwork, she'd picked the wrong nerd. I sent a new, more forceful email to the HOA board, CCing the city planner, attaching scans of everything. In my calmest tone, I requested a written clarification about the property line and reminded them, gently, that if the HOA was allowing false claims to be enforced, I'd have to consider my legal options. The phrase, "my attorney will be in touch," has a magical effect, even in an email. Suddenly, I was getting replies. Vague, bureaucratic ones, but at least the system was waking up. Meanwhile, Karen's tactics took a turn from dramatic to downright weird. She hired a local surveyor. At least, a guy with a tape measure and a pickup truck with Bob's Land Services magnetized to the side. He showed up one sunny afternoon, glancing nervously at my security camera as he walked the property line with Karen glued to his elbow, jabbering away about historic boundaries and encroachments. The guy looked about as thrilled to be there as someone forced to attend a lecture on the taxonomy of lawn grass, but he dutifully measured and scribbled on a clipboard. When he finished, Karen marched over to my mailbox and tucked a note inside. "Official survey underway. You are hereby warned." The note was signed Karen, homeowner. I nearly choked on my coffee. Who signs a note like that? I pinned it on my fridge for posterity. The surveyor incident was a gift in disguise. I waited until dusk and then introduced myself to Bob as he was loading up his truck. I kept my tone friendly and casual, just another neighbor out for a walk. He admitted, after a little prodding, that he wasn't a licensed surveyor. He'd just been paid cash to walk the property and mark a few things. He laughed awkwardly and said he'd seen a lot of neighborhood disputes, but nothing quite like this. He didn't file any official report, and when I pressed for a copy of his measurements, he shrugged and told me Karen had insisted it was all informal. So much for her official survey. By now, the drama had reached such heights that I couldn't open my mailbox without expecting a glitter bomb or a cease and desist letter. Instead, I got an anonymous flyer slipped inside. Concerned Neighbors for Community Harmony, inviting me to an emergency HOA meeting. The flyer didn't mention names, but it didn't have to. The agenda was recent property line issues and parking conflicts. The meeting was set for Saturday at the Community Rec Center. I RSVP'd immediately. If this was the hill Karen wanted to die on, I'd bring a flag, a binder, and popcorn. Saturday arrived with a summer storm in the air and a crowd of neighbors packed into the small, echoing room at the rec center. Karen was already there, sitting at the front, flanked by her allies, two older couples who'd always seemed pleasant but now looked like backup singers for the Supremes of suburbia. I sat near the back, binder in my lap, heart racing with the anticipation of a high school debate final. The HOA president, Mr. Langley, cleared his throat and read from the agenda in that special monotone reserved for doomed meetings. Karen launched into her speech first, dramatically laying out her case. Confusion over historic boundaries, neighborhood safety, her deep commitment to maintaining community order. She had photos of my car, my driveway, the cones, even one of me waving at her camera like an idiot. She cited her official survey, flashing Bob's scribbles like they were the Magna Carta. Her voice shook with conviction, and I could see a few heads in the crowd nodding along. This was Karen at her best. Earnest, persuasive, almost sympathetic if you didn't know any better. My turn came. I stood up, unzipped my binder, and let the paperwork do the talking. I explained how property lines are established, showed the official plat map, and handed out copies of the city's response. I pointed out that Karen's official survey was neither official nor filed, and that the HOA was in violation of its own bylaws by acting on a private dispute. My tone was calm, my words measured, but I didn't hold back. I even quoted Karen's own notes and reminded the board that calling the police over civil disputes was not just disruptive, but potentially actionable. The room was silent for a moment, then a few murmurs broke out. I could see Mr. Langley checking the plat map, frowning, clearly uncomfortable. The HOA lawyer, a bored-looking woman who had been texting under the table, glanced at my documents and suddenly sat up straighter. After a few whispered conversations at the front, Mr. Langley announced that the HOA would need to conduct a formal review, and that no actions will be taken until the matter was resolved. I'd called Karen's bluff in front of a live audience, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, just an angry flush and a look that promised this was far from over. It turns out the word thief, chalked on your own driveway, is a fantastic conversation starter, at least if your neighborhood thrives on gossip and spectacle. That morning, as I stood with my coffee mug surveying Karen's latest attempt at psychological warfare, I felt the first real crack in my patience. For weeks, I'd played the game by the rules, trusted in paperwork, logic, and a dash of sarcasm. But seeing that oversized, shaky accusation scrawled across the concrete where I used to play basketball as a kid, that hit a nerve. It wasn't about boundaries anymore, it was about humiliation. And that, I decided, was not going to stand. My first move was to wash the chalk away with my garden hose, making sure the entire block saw me do it. Mrs. Patel waved awkwardly as she passed, her eyes darting between me and Karen's window. 2 houses down, the Wilson twins circled on their bikes, waiting for drama. I gave them a big, theatrical salute with the hose, earning a snicker from one of them. Let them see that I wasn't rattled. Let Karen see it too. But inside I was reeling. I spent the morning on the phone with the HOA, politely escalating my complaint from unanswered to urgently unresolved. I requested a written retraction for the violation notice and a public statement clarifying the actual property lines. I copied the city again, this time attaching a photograph of the chalked accusation, asking them, pointedly, how much vandalism had to occur before they intervened. Karen, of course, was not deterred. By noon, I heard the distinctive beep of a truck backing up. Peeking through my blinds, I saw a local tow company parking right outside my driveway. At first, I thought maybe one of the neighbors had called them for an unrelated reason, but then I spotted Karen in her trademark sun visor, clutching a folder and striding up to the tow driver like she was the mayor greeting a foreign dignitary. They stood at the edge of my property, gesturing toward my car. My name, apparently, was now on a do not park list for my own address. I took out my phone and began recording. If Karen wanted to escalate, fine. So could I. I stepped outside, calm as ever, and called out to the tow driver. Can I help you? This is my house. The guy looked apologetic, glancing nervously at Karen, then at me. I was told this vehicle was trespassing? I held up my ID and pointed to my address, still painted on the curb. I live here. The car is registered to me. And just to be clear, you're on private property right now. I'd hate for there to be any confusion. I watched Karen's face morph from smug satisfaction to tight-lipped irritation. The driver made a show of checking his work order, then handed the paperwork back to Karen and told her, "Sorry, ma'am. I can't tow from this address without a police report or an HOA directive. Have a good day." He climbed into his truck and drove off, leaving Karen seething at the curb. After the failed tow incident, things got weirder. The very next evening, I came home to find that someone, I wonder who, had dumped a bag of mulch on the edge of my driveway. Not the whole driveway, just a haphazard pile encroaching enough to make parking awkward. Taped to the bag was a note, "Beautification project. Please cooperate with ongoing community improvements." It was so on the nose that I had to laugh, even as I dragged the mulch away and tossed it into my backyard for later use. I was beginning to suspect Karen was running out of ideas, or at least cycling through every tool in the suburban passive aggression toolbox. But the universe loves irony, and the next day delivered a plot twist I could never have scripted. A letter arrived from the city, an official one, with stamps and signatures and the weight of actual government authority. It stated that after reviewing the plat map, property records, and recent complaints, they found no evidence that my driveway extended onto anyone else's property. In fact, the records confirmed that the line Karen was obsessed with was over 3 feet inside my legal boundary. The letter included a copy of the map, a summary of their findings, and a note for the HOA to cease any enforcement action. I read it 3 times before a wave of pure relief hit me. Now armed with official backing, I made copies of the letter and put one in every neighbor's mailbox on my block. I emailed it to the HOA requesting a public apology. I taped a laminated version to my front door. If Karen wanted an audience, I was happy to provide the main event. For the first time since this circus began, the neighborhood seemed to turn. Mrs. Patel stopped by with a plate of cookies and a muttered, "Sorry you're dealing with this, dear." Even the Wilson twins gave me a thumbs up as they zipped past. But if you think Karen was going to back down just because the city and the HOA had finally sided with reality, you'd be underestimating her capacity for creative desperation. The very next morning, I heard a banging on my door. I opened it to find Karen, clutching her folder like a life raft, her lips pressed in a thin white line. She skipped any pleasantries. "You've made a mockery of this entire community. Spreading lies. Intimidating your neighbors. This isn't over." Her voice was pitched just loud enough for anyone in earshot to catch the drama. I kept my voice calm, measured, unflappable. "Karen, if you have a concern, you're welcome to bring it to the HOA. But as you can see," I pointed to the laminated city letter, "the matter is settled. Please stop trespassing on my property and harassing me." She trembled with frustration, words stuck behind clenched teeth. I watched the gears turning, the way her need to win at all costs battled with the reality that every authority she'd appealed to had finally shut her down. She stormed off without another word, but I knew this was the moment when things could truly spiral. Sure enough, that evening the HOA group chat, which, yes, I was forced to join after the first meeting, blew up with a flurry of accusations. Anonymous posts about unfriendly neighbors, property destroyers, and people who think they're above the rules. None mentioned me by name, but everyone knew who the posts were about. I replied only once, attaching the city's official map and a smiley face, then muted the conversation. No use feeding the fire. The next morning, my doorbell rang before sunrise. I opened it to find a process server standing on my stoop, looking half asleep and sheepish. "You've been served," he said, handing me a manila envelope. Inside, a notice of a civil lawsuit, Karen as plaintiff, naming me as defendant. The charge? Malicious encroachment and emotional distress. I almost laughed, but the legal paperwork was real. Karen, boxed in by fact and reason, was going to try to win in the one arena where chaos and drama still reigned supreme, small claims court. It was official. The stakes had gone from petty neighbor drama to a battle with legal consequences, and there was no guarantee that a bored local judge wouldn't humor Karen for the sake of neighborhood peace. Suddenly, the fight was about more than chalk, cones, or even a driveway. It was about the principle of standing your ground, no matter how wild the accusations or relentless the opposition. And for the first time, I started to feel the pressure of the long game Karen was willing to play. If you've never been sued by a neighbor, let me spare you the suspense. It's like being forced to join a community theater production you never auditioned for, starring in a drama you didn't write, and discovering your antagonist is also the director, scriptwriter, and star. That's how I felt walking into small claims court on the morning of the hearing, clutching my carefully indexed binder and resisting the urge to offer Karen an autograph. She stood in the hallway, surrounded by her supporters, 2 HOA board members and a local real estate agent who looked less like legal muscle and more like they'd been promised free muffins. Karen had a stack of folders, color-coded with sticky note. She gave me a triumphant, rehearsed smile, like she already knew the ending. Inside the courtroom, the judge, a balding man with the weathered patience of someone who's seen too many HOA squabbles, called our names. Karen started with the energy of a reality TV contestant on finale night. She launched into a tale of historic injustice, emotional distress, and encroachment. She showed photos, my car parked in my driveway, her chalk line, the cones, screenshots of her own group chat posts as evidence. She described how she lived in fear, how her sleep was ruined by my hostility, how the entire street was on edge because I refused to respect community order. To her credit, she even squeezed out a tear. One of the board members patted her arm, and the real estate agent nodded gravely as if signing a mortgage. When it was my turn, I stood, flipped open my binder, and laid out my defense. Calm. Measured. Not a hint of emotion, just the facts. Property survey, plat map, tax records, the letter from the city, emails from the HOA, even a notarized statement from the previous owner. I presented the city's explicit boundary map and read aloud the city planner's letter confirming my driveway's legality. I even passed copies to the judge, Karen, and her legal team. Then, for good measure, I showed a video clip from my security camera, the one where Karen tried to have my car towed and the driver refused, citing the law. I stopped short of mentioning the mulch incident or the chalk, keeping my argument airtight and devoid of pettiness. The judge listened in silence, then asked a few clarifying questions, mostly for Karen, whose explanations grew more elaborate and less coherent. He raised an eyebrow at her emotional distress, noting that it seemed mostly self-inflicted. He asked her why, if she truly believed I was trespassing, she hadn't filed a police report beyond her one call, and why she continued escalating the conflict after the city's ruling. Karen faltered, blaming the ambiguity of modern maps and a lack of HOA support. She claimed the HOA board was afraid of my influence, which drew a visible wince from the president. After an hour of testimony, the judge called a recess. Karen glared at me in the hallway, her supporters whispering anxiously. I could see the momentum shift. A few neighbors who'd shown up out of morbid curiosity now eyed Karen with open skepticism. Mrs. Patel, loyal to a fault, offered Karen a tissue, but even she seemed less certain. Meanwhile, the Wilson twins, who had apparently skipped school for this, gave me a subtle thumbs up as they snacked on courthouse vending machine candy. It was the smallest thing, but it steadied my nerves. When we reconvened, the judge wasted no time. He ruled that the evidence was overwhelming. The property was mine, the driveway was mine, and Karen's distress was the result of her own relentless campaign. He dismissed the lawsuit and issued a warning about harassment. Neighbors are not adversaries, he said, and this court is not an arena for feuds. Let's end this. You could feel the tension drain from the room. Karen's face flushed, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely at a loss. Her supporters melted away, murmuring excuses about errands and appointments. I walked out of the courtroom to a weird sort of neighborhood celebrity status. People I barely knew started stopping me on the sidewalk, offering everything from congratulations to apology cookies. Mrs. Patel, ever diplomatic, baked her famous lemon bars and said she hoped everyone could move on. The HOA sent a formal letter retracting the violation and, grudgingly, an apology. They even scheduled a community unity event, as if a potluck could erase months of warfare. I went, if only to prove I wasn't a recluse, and watched Karen from across the buffet table as she made small talk, the usual confidence replaced with brittle politeness. For the first time, I sensed the battle had actually worn her down. The fire was still there, but it burned behind her eyes rather than out in the open. You'd think that would be the end of it. A logical close to the suburban saga, vindication delivered, order restored. But Karen wasn't wired for simple defeat. 2 weeks later, she launched her final move. She listed her house for sale. Signs went up overnight. Stunning corner property. Unique community. Motivated seller. The neighborhood text threads lit up with speculation. Some believed she was running from embarrassment, others said she'd been looking for an excuse to move anyway. Only Karen knows for sure. But the day before her first open house, I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. No signature, but I knew the handwriting. It read, "Congratulations. You got your way. But some people will always remember what you did to this neighborhood. Good luck finding new friends." I sat down and let myself laugh for the first time in weeks, loud, full, and utterly free. All this time, I'd worried about being the villain in her story, when the truth was, Karen was always going to need a nemesis, with or without me. A few days later, moving trucks arrived. I watched from my porch as Karen's life was packed into boxes. Her garden gnomes, the flamingo mailbox, even the infamous cones. She avoided my eyes, kept her head down. I thought about waving, but decided against it. Let her have whatever dignity she could scrape together. As the sun set on her last day, I finally felt the neighborhood exhale. Kids cut through my driveway again, neighbors stopped for real conversations, and the HOA meetings went back to their usual monotony of paint colors and recycling rules. But one final twist remained, a testament to the bizarre magic of suburban warfare. That night, after Karen's moving van pulled away, I found another envelope on my doorstep. This one contained a copy of her real estate listing, and attached was a gift card to the local coffee shop. No note, just the card. I took it as a peace offering, or maybe just her final, cryptic move. Either way, I made a point of buying a round of coffees for my neighbors the next morning, raising a cup in silent toast to the strangest, wildest, most exhausting chapter of my life. And with that, I reclaimed not just my drive. I woke up that first morning after Karen left and was greeted by a silence so unfamiliar, it actually made me laugh. For the first time in months, there was no sign waving, no porch surveillance, no sideways glances from neighbors wondering if they just wandered into an episode of Desperate Households. The air felt lighter. I could pull my car into my driveway without feeling like an extra in a courtroom drama. It was over, or so I thought. I spent the next few days soaking in the sheer normalcy, half expecting Karen to pop out from behind a bush with a fresh stack of HOA bylaws. But instead, the neighborhood thawed. The Wilson twins dared each other to race their bikes up and down my driveway again. Mrs. Patel brought by a plate of lemon bars, this time with an actual smile and a chat about her upcoming trip to see her grandkids. Even the HOA president strolled over one evening with a bottle of wine, offering a surprisingly heartfelt apology for letting things get so far out of hand. We clinked glasses right there on my porch, watching the sun set in peace. I thought the story had ended exactly as it should. Justice served, dignity intact, the petty drama retired with its original cast. But stories like these have a way of curling back for one last encore. It started innocently enough, with a for sale sign in Karen's front yard that didn't budge. Weeks passed, and while plenty of cars slowed down, nobody seemed interested in buying her house. The longer the sign lingered, the more the neighborhood speculated. Maybe it was the rumors, or maybe people just sensed there was history baked into those walls, the way cigarette smoke never really leaves. Whatever the reason, Karen's motivated seller pitch wasn't getting traction. One afternoon, the neighborhood group chat pinged with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Karen's old real estate agent, sending out a plea. "If anyone knows of interested buyers, please let me know. The owner is very eager to sell and open to offers." The subtext was clear. Karen was desperate. And that's when an idea, so wild and absurd I almost dismissed it, planted itself in my mind and wouldn't let go. I'd spent months playing defense, holding my ground, never once returning fire with the kind of escalation Karen specialized in. But maybe, just this once, I could give fate a little nudge. I didn't need her house, obviously. But I knew someone who might. My younger sister, Erin, had just accepted a new job in the city and was house hunting. She and her wife wanted to start a family and had been priced out of every half-decent neighborhood in a 10-mile radius. I called Erin that evening and, with more than a little mischief, suggested she take a look at the property next door. We laughed about it for a while, imagining Erin outmaneuvering the ghosts of Karen's cones and flamingo mailbox, but the more she thought about it, the more interested she became. If the price is right and the place is solid, why not? She said. At least I know I'll have a neighbor who's good in a crisis. A week later, Erin toured the house with her realtor. She called me as soon as she left. It needs work, but it's nothing we can't handle. The bones are good. And the price, she laughed, delighted. I think we can swing it. The negotiations were swift. Karen, through her agent, was willing to throw in all the appliances and drop the price if Erin agreed to a quick close. It was almost suspicious how eager she was to be done with the whole saga. Within a month, Erin and her wife owned Karen's old house. The last trace of Karen vanished with the new welcome mat they laid out, one that read, "Good vibes only." I'll admit, there was a part of me that found the whole thing poetic. The neighbor who tried to rewrite property lines out of spite was now replaced by family, someone who'd never try to tow my car or file a lawsuit over driveway etiquette. Instead, Erin and I started new rituals. Barbecue nights in the backyard, shared garden beds, lazy Sunday coffees with the fence between us open wide. The Wilson twins pitched in with a lemonade stand at the end of the driveway. Mrs. Patel declared our block a real community again, and insisted on hosting a potluck to celebrate. It was, in every way, the neighborhood I remembered before Karen's reign. But there was one final surprise Karen left behind, a loose thread waiting to be tugged. As Erin and her wife unpacked, they found an old accordion file stuffed behind the furnace. It was overflowing with paperwork. HOA violation letters, legal threats, frantic to-do lists, even a set of rejected NO parking signs Karen must have forgotten to deploy. Tucked inside was a single-page letter written in Karen's spiky handwriting. It read, "If you're reading this, congrats on inheriting the neighborhood headache. It's your problem now." Erin texted me a photo of the letter. She really couldn't help herself, could she? We laughed until we cried. Over time, the house lost every trace of Karen. The flamingo mailbox was swapped out for something tasteful. The garden gnomes were donated to the local community center, where, last I heard, they've taken up residence by the koi pond. Erin and her wife painted over the beautification project, mulch stains with fresh wildflowers. The cones, for all I know, are now serving as traffic markers in someone else's feud across town. People ask me if I ever worried that things would flare up again, or that someone new might try to claim a sliver of my driveway in the name of community order. But the truth is, surviving a Karen siege teaches you something vital: how to stand your ground, how to fight smart, and, most importantly, how to keep your sense of humor when the world goes off the rails. I realized that the real victory wasn't just about a legal win or getting my driveway back. It was reclaiming my home from pettiness, turning a battlefield into a place where laughter and kindness had room to grow again. And every so often, as I park my car with zero drama, I catch myself smiling at the memory of a chalk thief and a chorus of cones guarding an imaginary border. That driveway, once a symbol of conflict, has become a quiet badge of survival. And while I hope I never meet another Karen like her, I'm a little more prepared if I do. There's a binder of paperwork on my shelf, a crew of neighbors who know the value of real community, and a family next door who remind me daily that some fights are worth it, even when you never wanted them in the first place. In the end, Karen was right about one thing. Some people really do remember what you did to the neighborhood. But what they remember, now, is that I didn't let her rewrite the story. I played the long game, and when it was finally over, the victory tasted sweet, like lemon bars and laughter and the relief of being, at last, truly home.